But if me and two other guys set up a company and design games together, and one of them is the director of the board, and I'm the designer, then even if we just make 10 copies on a Xerox, by this definition, it's not an indie game. So it's a pretty strict definition about publishing formats. From the Forge, you got a lot of games using pretty strong mechanics to shape the narrative. And some of the early ones were pretty clunky and pretty system-driven. Because Ron Edwards has this thing he says that system does matter. For a while in the 90s we thought that, it doesn't matter what system you use because all role-playing games will feel the same. And from some of the games that come from the Forge, you see very clearly that this isn't true. You have games that affect the story in a way that a traditional role-playing game never could. One instance is Game Sorcerer, which requires you, as part of the game, to define a term called humanity. Now, depending on your group, you will define the humanity in your campaign different. For one group, you might define that humanity in this campaign means that we always, we respect human rights. In another group, it might mean, we never kill people. In another, it might mean just try to save your immortal soul from the devil. But this humanity thing, it has a direct effect on how you summon and control the demons in the game. Because in order to summon and control a demon, you have to commit a breach against humanity. So if in your game humanity means respecting life, that means you kill something to get a demon. Or if it means respecting human rights in general, that means you can just oppress someone and take away their basic humanity rights. And that means you are allowed to control and summon a demon. So the system, a very simple system, affects very deeply how you play the game. This is like one of many examples from Sorcerer. It's a fairly complex and cool game. But it's also written, it was like one of the first games doing this. So it's kind of hard to just pick up and play. You have endless forum threads about it, and there's a guy writing a book now about how to play Sorcerer the right way. Who's not wrong? Alright. But as I said, a lot of these games are pretty strict, pretty strongly typed, but then you had you had what they call a, how do you pronounce it, diaspora, right? Which is basically, at some point, Ron Edwards closed down the thievery forums on the Forge and closed down some of the other bits because there was too much babble. And he wanted people to go out, create their own sites, and make up their own things. And that's happened a lot with the story games community, which is a bunch of people who want to be hipsters, I suppose. These people don't self-identify as much as like t-shirt, bearded gamers, but more like, we're cool and we do this because it's fun. And maybe as a consequence of that, I don't know, but the systems are using less mechanics, they're more about hippie stuff, they're about emotions, about, relating to human issues. They're very like human games, they're very social games in a way. There's a lot of focus on actual play in the community. It doesn't matter what someone says about your game, if they haven't actually tried it, that's what matters. So, but as with all communities, you get this status systems, who has the most actual play threads on forums, for instance. That's a measure of success. But these are the Americans. And of course, in Europe, we're very influenced by them. This is, by some definitions, the first indie role-playing game. Dungeons & Dragons, you might have heard of it. You don't get more indie than that. It's, some guy sitting in his basement, printing copies of his books and playtesting with his friends. And they are unreadable and hardly playable straight from the book. So you would have to modify these games very, very heavily to make them work. And that's what happened a lot in the start. People would house rule D&D and make their own rules, basically. And if you look back on old fanzines and magazines like Alarms and Excursions and stuff happening in the 70s, like from even before the official publication of these books, there was a lot of experimentation going on. People were doing crazy things that today we're just rediscovering a lot of things people did back then. But from this, from the early indie games, you get the Mighty Empire, that's Wizards of the Coast today. and they're no longer indie by any meaning of the term. But I will return to that later. Yeah, because indie and mainstream, they have this weird interrelationship. Most of the indie games that are around today would never be around if you didn't have the mainstream games. There's something called a fantasy heartbreaker, which is somebody making a game reacting to Dungeons & Dragons, basically. They say, okay, this old game doesn't work, I'm going to make my own perfect version that works much better. And everyone will love it, and it's called a heartbreaker because you played it with your friends for 10 years, and you publish it, you print like 2,000 copies or 10,000, whatever, and you hand out 5 at a con, and the rest lie in your basement and rot because nobody's going to buy your version of D&D. It's a fantasy heartbreaker. However, there's this undercurrent presently of mainstream games picking up indie ideas. I had this interview. I'll just read some quotes from an interview with the designer of Warhammer, the new Warhammer role-playing game. Has anyone played the new Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play? No? Okay, well it's pretty big. It comes in a boxed set. It looks awesome. I think I have a picture of it. Yes. That doesn't look very indie at all, but but most definitions it isn't. But here's what the guy said when we interviewed him. Outside of the depth of Games Workshop-based products, quite a few other role-playing games influenced my design. Some of them simply by virtue of being games I played quite a bit, or being games that expanded my view of what role-playing games could be and what they can offer as a good gameplay experience. And others by providing an interesting take on mechanics or interactions that I found particularly refreshing or inspiring. And it lists a bunch, and some are games we all know, like Call of Cthulhu or Marvel, but some are like indie games, like tiny games, like Don't Rest Your Head, or Inspectors, Little Fears, My Life with Master, and Primetime Adventures. All these games come from the Forge. I have the games on his list, so it looks like it's kind of coming full circle again. People picking up indie ideas, but putting them into very strongly mainstream games. And then there's D&D. Because in the new Dungeon Master's Guide 2, you have the player's handbook, which teaches you how to play the game and use the miniatures and fight the battles and use magic. And then in Dungeon Master 2, you get this group storytelling advice, which again reads almost like it's taken from Dogs in the Vineyard or other indie games. They're about group storytelling. They're about say yes or roll the dice. They're about not saying no to other people's ideas and shutting them down, building on other people's input. They're about players being allowed to frame scenes, about players actually getting narrative input. It's no longer like the game master controls everything. The players have their say and build setting in the game. And that's also pretty, well, to me at least, it seems pretty obvious that it's the same undercurrent. Whether they play the same games, I don't know. But it seems to be a current in the games in general. Alright, Nordic indie, which is my specialty. The thing about the Nordic countries, we have such a tiny market. So by definition, we're almost always indie designers. It's very hard to find someone who's published a game in the Nordic countries who's actually professional or has more than one person working for them. And in Norway, it's always been like we publish our own games. We'll usually be just one guy in one city publishing his game, and one guy in another city, and always guys, no girls. One guy in another city, and they wouldn't have any sort of contact, and nobody would know about each other. And the games would come out, and they would hang around for a while and then die, and the guy would never make another game because it was, a bit heartbreaking, basically. This is from a fanzine I started in the 90s in Malmö. It still exists as a website. We had a lot of fun with that. In a tiny community like the Nordic game design community, having a fanzine like this helps show people that we exist and helps people see each other. In this fanzine, there's been a lot of games published, a lot of scenarios. People have gotten connected with each other. So it's actually been, been very good for building a community. The guy who drew the cover, he's on an artist scholarship in Berlin. So in Finland, the problem with Finland is nobody knows what people are doing here. So we know that you've got Norwegian which is by Mika Pogala, and people like me who are very interested will have heard about Star Wreck, or this penguin game from Johanna Pettersson. But people, I don't know, Finnish games don't reach out to the world, I think, in the same way. What the Finns do, which is very cool, is to translate other people's games into Finnish. You know, like Eero is publishing like 4 different Forge games. And these guys they have this Nordic translation project, so they've translated the Norwegian game Hitra's By into Finnish and are publishing it. But it's very hard for the outside world to know what sort of game mechanics, what sort of play you have. We know about Finnish LARPs, but tabletop. Then you have Denmark. See the penguins? Again, I don't know why. Denmark, they are amazing. They have this festival called Festival, which is every year, and it's a good gaming con. And the only really different thing about it is their reward ceremony and the reward systems. Because every year you get like this. A lot of people get this golden penguin at the award ceremony, and people dress up really, you know, in suits and stuff, and go to a gala banquet. And the award ceremony is a pretty big deal. And they have this whole community around it where people really go for the win. Instead of like, you know, it's like, you know, you have like 20 scenario designers, 4 of them maybe handle something before the contest starts, and then somebody wins based on who the con people like. So it's not really such a big deal. But in